All right, I am now joined by Brako Marcetic as a staff writer for Jacobin, the author of Yesterday's Man, The Case Against Joe Biden, from Verso, which you can buy from Red Emma's, a worker-owned bookstore in Baltimore. I have the link for that in the description. And what we were going to talk about today is we already said we were going to talk about this beforehand, but Branko just had an article about this that was published in Jacobin yesterday, which is Joe Biden's rogues gallery of neoliberal ghouls that he has appointed to various positions in his incoming administration. So thanks for coming, Branko.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So obviously, it seemed like you were the man to talk about this with, since we had the previous conversation about Biden, and you literally wrote the book about him. So I think that the way that you framed it in the Jacobin piece, is a fun and striking way to do it, which is how would these same picks be covered? People with these same records, who'd taken some of these same positions, who had some of the same corporate links. If these were Trump appointees, which, as you point out, we don't have to speculate about that.
Yeah, I mean, I just found it a really stark contrast. I remember 2016, 2017 when Trump was coming in, and the reporting against his picks, because Trump is and was and probably forever will be treated as sort of this unique aberrational figure, as someone that we've never seen the likes of this before in US politics. His picks were treated sort of similarly, where every single person he chose was kind of, their histories were delved into in depth, and we went through, what the implications of what them being appointed could mean for various things, whether the economy or, inequality, climate change, that kind of thing, all completely fair and right. I mean, I think that is
right,
what reporting should focus on. And so I actually thought that was a really good trend that happened in the Trump administration, that the media was sort of applying this scrutiny to people's backgrounds and to their kind of ideological outlook. But that has just completely evaporated now with Biden. I mean, I think I don't have to tell anyone that the reporting on Biden's picks is overwhelmingly focused on their diversity. That's sort of the narrative is, this is a break from the Trump past, because while the problem with Trump's appointees were that they were all old white men or older white men. And Biden has instead stacked his incoming administration with people of color, women. And so that is how there's a break happening from the Trump era. Whereas in reality, I mean, if you look at what the reporting was on in 2016, yes, there was a lack of diversity among Trump's choices, but also people were hitting him for picking people who had terrible views on climate change. They were picking him for, they were hitting him for having picked people who came from corporate backgrounds, who came from Wall Street after running this populist campaign against globalists, so on and so forth. People who were invested in some of the same industries that they were now going to be either regulating or making policy in relation to. And all of that applies to Biden. I mean, Biden's picks are coming from Wall Street, whether it's BlackRock or some other firm. Goldman Sachs this time has been left out. Seems we're getting BlackRock instead of Goldman Sachs. Or we look at somebody like Michelle Flournoy and their kind of self-dealing and everything, and we can go into that, I guess, in detail a little later. But these same problems apply to Biden's picks as it did to Trump's, and the reporting around it has just, unless you read left or independent media, it basically just doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really struck me the most reading your new piece about this, which I should say it's called "It's Joe Biden's Swamp Now." It's a good title, but it is that a lot of the stuff around climate issues, because I think this is something that even a lot of people who aren't radicals or socialists correctly think is one of the most urgent things that needs federal action. right now, given the scope of the crisis and the possible consequences in the future and the consequences that have already happened, and that's where I think that a lot of this stuff is the most bleak, right? So you mentioned, for example, well, actually, I'll just tee you off with these, right? A couple of examples that you mentioned are his pick for energy secretary and his pick for climate czar, which are obviously some of the most important things for this stuff. And you'd think if he takes climate change seriously as a as this urgent threat, something that, as we constantly hear, we don't have that many years to to deal with before the situation becomes that much worse, and was also, by the way, something that was a real focus of a lot of media coverage and a lot of protests of Trump's picks. The people that Biden has chosen for this. I mean, this is pretty bleak.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, John Kerry, who was the climate czar, he was one of the people that pushed that kind of all of the above strategy under Obama. There were protests actually outside his house during the Obama era because of his approval of the Alberta Clipper pipeline, which is one of these pipelines that was kind of a keystone pipeline that the industry was kind of laying to create a path going from basically the Alberta tar sands all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. Activists obviously focused overwhelming amount of energy and attention on that, and ultimately it succeeded, but it came thanks to a lot of pressure from people. We also have to remember Standing Rock. That happened under Obama. That was while Kerry was Secretary of State. Besides that, Kerry
really promoted fracking.
Yeah, he promoted fracking, exactly. Natural gas as well, of course. So that is not particularly encouraging. We can say Kerry's not the worst pick. And of course, he has done some good things, of course, his role in the Paris Climate Agreement. But, as we, I would hope that we don't have to stress this, but perhaps we do. The agreement and agreements like the Paris Climate Agreement, they're good, but they only matter in as much as you're actually going to do the things on the ground to meet the goals. And basically no one's doing that, least of all the US, which under Obama became a major fossil fuel exporter. But okay, so that's John Kerry. That's his climate czar. Maybe not the worst. But then you have, as Biden's top economic advisor, you have Brian Deese, who is from BlackRock. He was head of their sustainable management or sustainable investing practices, rather, at BlackRock. And BlackRock during that whole time was a terrible, investor in a whole host of pollutive industries. It's been called one of the, the top investor, I believe, in deforestation around the world. BlackRock bears a large amount of responsibility for the really, really scary deforestation happening of the Amazon rainforest. That Biden himself said, he was actually, I think, the only candidate to talk about this during the race, to say that we need to do something about this. And now he's actually put the guy literally in charge of lighting and then pouring gasoline on the fires there. I shouldn't say literally. He didn't literally do that, but
he wasn't that low in the totem pole.
No. Well, the good thing is if you're someone in a place like BlackRock, you don't literally have to do any of that. You invest in industries that will pay people to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's the economic equivalent of a drone strike. You don't have to think about it.
Yeah, exactly. And then, we look at some of his other ponies. I mean, Cedric Richmond, who's meant to be his liaison to the climate movement, he, I think, has the fourth or fifth highest donations from the fossil fuel industry in the House among Democrats. His possible energy secretary pick, Ernest Moniz, who was the energy secretary under Obama, of course. He's on the board of Southern Company. He's against the Green New Deal. He talks about a Green Real Deal, which basically is kind of a return to that all of the above strategy, which at this point,
Yeah, you mentioned that, but just in case there is anybody watching this, who wasn't familiar with that, at the time. I mean, I think the name kind of gives you the, like probably just from the name, people can guess, right? But do you want to get into a little bit what that all of the above energy strategy was?
Yeah, I mean, the idea was that to transition away from fossil fuels, you couldn't just do this by doing a kind of radical break from the status quo. What you would do is you would slowly ramp up, investing and reliance on renewable technologies, green technologies, that kind of thing, while also continuing to exploit and use and rely on fossil fuels, particularly natural gas. That was kind of sold by people like Kerry and Ernest Moniz and Obama himself as this bridging fossil fuel that's meant to get us from traditional fossil fuels to renewables. And there's copious reporting about this that is completely bunk. That there's not really evidence that liquid natural gas is really that much better for the environment. It still puts out a lot of emissions, maybe not the same emissions as other types of fossil fuels, but still damaging ones nonetheless. And the result is that this problem is just getting worse and worse, despite all the good things that Obama did on this. The fact is that the response was so tepid and gradual that it hasn't really made a dent in what needs to be done, and we just don't have the time to kind of anymore to do this all of the above incrementalist, gradualist strategy.
Yeah, I mean, if you're still, you're developing like you're developing green alternatives, that's great, but if you're also like really continuing, and even, expanding in some cases, some of the most destructive, practices, then, I mean, there's a reason why, I mean, like this is not I guess this is not just critique that you'd find at places like Jacobin. You can find plenty of mainstream environmental groups who were horrified by this, who were writing all kinds of things at the time. I remember there's an open letter to Obama from 18 different environmental groups, saying that all of the above was a compromise that future generations, couldn't afford, and arguably, I mean, look, global climate change has already had consequences that that this generation couldn't easily afford. That it's led to, I mean, a lot of analysts have argued that that it led to the drying and drought in Syria that helped start create the conditions for the explosion in that society that that led to a civil war that had led to millions and millions of people fleeing from the country, which in turn interacted in a really awful way with the kind of rise of this like demagogic right-wing pseudo-populism, because people could fearmonger about refugees. And I don't think you have to go to the most apocalyptic predictions about what all of this could look like to see that like it wouldn't take that much more of that kind of thing to be really, really catastrophic.
Yeah, and yet climate groups, environmental groups have basically been mum on this. I mean, they've praised Kerry's appointment, which you could justify on some level. We say, well, look, it could have been worse. And ultimately, Kerry does have some good spots in his record. He worked on climate change during the 90s, for instance. So you could say, okay, they're sort of, they don't want to criticize this pick because this isn't the worst one. But then why you would be silent on not just Deese, but I've forgotten his name now, but there's another economic advisor that Biden's picked that also comes from BlackRock. So you have two BlackRock appointees, from a company that is directly responsible, perhaps more than any other finance company, for the destruction of the Amazon, which has massive, massive implications for stopping catastrophic climate change. And there's just radio silence on this from a host of sort of, liberal environmental groups. And, I mean, David Schroeder wrote a good piece, I believe it came out today, about basically how this normalization of these picks is actually a really dangerous thing. And I think he's right. He makes the point that these groups are probably trying to play ball, trying to sort of get influence with the new administration, which is, I think, what everyone's kind of hoping that they'll be able to do, is to just get some sort of leverage or influence in Biden's policies ultimately. And so, let's let sleeping dogs lie. Let's not, criticize them and turn them against us. But I don't know. I mean, is this strategy really the smartest one when it certainly looks like Biden's not going to go nearly as far as we need to on this issue? I mean, shouldn't groups like this be taking a harder line, not just for their own to maintain their own legitimacy and to sort of be able to stand on principle in the future instead of just coming out and looking like partisan kind of dogs, but shouldn't it also be just to be able to push Biden? I mean, criticizing him and pointing out, hey, this stuff is the stuff that we would get pissed off at if it was Trump. That seems to be, to me, a more effective strategy than just trying to play nice and oh well, let him do what he needs to do. That we did that under Obama, and look how that turned out.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, any rundown of Biden's picks would not be complete without talking about friend of the show, Neera Tanden.
Yeah, that's right. So I think some parts of the left have interpreted this as a kind of like thumbing of the nose, or a deliberate attempt at trolling or to kind of humiliate the whatever, the Bernie wing of the party or what have you. But there's also been reporting that the Biden administration legitimately seems to have thought that they appointed someone who was a quote unquote movement leader. And that they're actually giving something to the left by appointing Tanden, which is obviously not true. And I'll give the little rundown of why that's not true. Tanden, yes, she's the head of the Center for American Progress, which has progress in its name.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. End of discussion. Okay, let's wrap this live stream up. No, I mean, yes, it has progress in its name. They're aligned with the Democratic Party, which doesn't really mean anything given the direction of the Democratic Party over the last 30 years. But she gets a lot of her money from Wall Street fundraising, and not just Wall Street, but a whole host of parts of corporate America, including health insurers and companies like that. I mean,
arguably in her case, in the Center for American Progress's case, as bad as the American Wall Street funding is, the international funding is even creepier.
Yeah, that's right. From the UAE and other Gulf states, really repressive governments that are basically involved in a genocidal war in Yemen. So other things about Tanden, she punched a staffer who went on to manage Bernie Sanders' campaign this year because he asked Hillary Clinton about the Iraq War in 2008. She outed a sexual harassment victim to her staff. She quite notoriously sent an email to actually the same staffer that she punched, suggesting that now that the U.S. has bombed Libya and turned it into a hellhole, right. The U.S. government should now take its oil to pay for this, for the service of having ravaged this country. Again, what would we say if this was someone that Trump had picked? Forget that she's Neera Tanden. Forget that she works for something called the Center for American Progress. Forget the fact that she's a woman of color. Forget all that. If you don't know any of that stuff, if you learned that about someone and it was Trump that was appointing them, would you say, oh, well, I'm sure that they have some nice personal qualities and they're not as bad as it could have been? Or would you be saying some of the things that you were saying under Trump, this is one of the most dangerous, worst picks ever. This is a complete act of hypocrisy. It's going back on the campaign this person ran, so on and so forth. Little thought experiment that we should all be not just doing ourselves, but prompting other people to do, I think, at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we don't have to speculate about how this sort of thing would be received under Trump, because we can go back and look at that, as you said, very welcome development, that when Trump came in, there was this unusual level of scrutiny of his appointments. And there were, there were a lot of articles in mainstream sources, pointing out like the obvious disconnect between his campaign pledge to drain the swamp and all of the swamp creatures, that he appointed. But then it seems like if you're not then examining the Biden swamp creatures and their terrible positions on on environmental issues, their deep corporate and Wall Street connections, then it's not like like the exercise of doing that under Trump. It's just at that point it really is revealed as just being point scoring. That they didn't they didn't like Trump, which of course nobody should, right? I like the I've always liked the line the citations needed guys use about this, about how the media is biased against Trump, but whatever, the media is also biased against cancer. Like that's just to be expected. But of course the problem with all of this is that if you're just falsely treating the Trump experience as more exceptional than it is, and there's an argument to be had about the the extent to which all of the horrible shit that Trump did is a continuation of pre-existing trends, and the extent to which it's an aberration, and that, and maybe as a as a result of it to a certain extent. But Godzilla was the result of radiation. He's still Godzilla. But, and I'm sure that the right answer, this is a very boringly uninformative thing to say, but I'm sure the right answer is always going to be, well, some of each, right? That there are respects in which Trump was business as usual, and there are respects in which Trump was worse. But if you're not going to deal with the business as usual, that's bad, both because the business as usual is horrifying, and also because to the extent that Trump is an aberration, if you're just going to like celebrate the return of the conditions that led to Trump in the first place, then you haven't learned anything, and it seems like you've just doomed yourself to the recurrence of the same thing. Why is it that why would technocratic neoliberals competently running everything why would that turn out better this time than it did before? Like, why would that end up like, if we're going to have 1,000 years of it now and it's going to be totally fine, like why didn't that happen under Obama?
Yeah, by adopting a strategy that treats Trump as an aberration, they are helping to ensure that he will not be. Right. And I frankly do not look forward to a future where my 2020s, where by the time I'm nearly 40 years old, I've had to sit through a Trump administration, a Biden administration, and a second Trump administration. That is not a world that any of us want to live in. Even the people that vote for Biden and fervently, really believe that he will take things back to normal. And, I also want to add, all of this that's going on right now, the way that the media and liberal advocacy organizations are just to, I guess, help Biden get through this transition and to be able to accomplish things for the country. And so they're not going to criticize him about any of this stuff and just give him a free ride on a whole bunch of really bad cabinet picks. That goes against the rationale that was relentlessly pushed by these same quarters during the election. That was the idea. You vote for Biden and then you push him left. Right. Now, look, I can understand people's skepticism that could ever have been accomplished. I was pretty skeptical of it, having studied this man's career. But of course, it was worth a shot. It was worth a shot more than sticking with another 4 years of Trump, which would have been a total catastrophe. But now that you've done this, where's the pushing? If you want to push him left, you can't just let him go and all this stuff, because what that means is that he can do whatever he wants, and you will never. He will not even face rhetorical pushback. And so why is he ever going to have any incentive to act a different way? I tried to, in my book, lay out how this man operates as a politician. The guy ran as a New Dealer when it was popular. Then when politics shifted to the right and he started getting pushback from the right, he spent the entire rest of his campaign terrified of the right and constantly trying to prove that, hey, I am just as conservative as everyone else, and I'm not a liberal. He was terrified of that label, liberal. The only way that you're going to push Biden left is if, instead of being terrified of the right as he always is and always has been and still is, as you can see from the way he's even now tailoring his coronavirus response so it fits in with the most extreme right-wing parts of the country, or I shouldn't even say parts of the country, segments of the country. The only way you're going to make him go left is if you give him an opposition that puts the fear of God into him the same way as the right does. And just letting him go this stuff is not going to do it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, especially because, thinking about Tandon, right? So, I mean, you kind of rattled off all of, not all of them, but, like some of the most objectively horrible things about her. But there's also this dimension that's, much less important, but I think is very telling that she's somebody who was like an absolutely relentless anti-left, anti-Bernie, Twitter troll essentially for years. I think that actually, like, if you look at their respective track records, she joined Twitter significantly after Trump has, but like has actually tweeted much more than he has. Like, if you compare their number of tweets, which is so like she's somebody who does the angry 4 a.m. Tweet storms, but they're all directed at not all of them, but a great deal of them have been directed against Bernie people, right? I mean, every sort of prominent like Bernie-crat leftist sort of media figure has their Dear Tandon run-ins. And of course, none of this is that like significant in the greater scheme of things, but the reason that it may be telling is that there are two interpretations of what was going through Biden's mind, taking to picking her for the OMB, and even bracketing the issue of like whether he really thinks he's going to get her through or not, or whether like later on there's going to be somebody and there's going to be some sort of long-term play here where it's like, well, we're going to have to appoint somebody more moderate, because the Republicans didn't like Neera Tanden, but even bracketing that, there are two interpretations. One of them is the one you expressed disagreement with earlier, right? Which is, I think there's maybe some circumstantial evidence for it, but I'm agnostic about this. Is that this was thumbing the nose, right? This was a deliberate attempt to spite the Bernie wing of the party, because she is somebody who is such a prominent, toxic, kind of anti-Bernie wing, troll, and especially because of Bernie Sanders' position on the budget committee and the role that he would have to play in shepherding through her nomination. That's what really makes it seem like an anti-left end zone dance. But if we charitably interpret, assume that that's not the case, right? That like, look, Biden or maybe even Biden's people, they're not that aware of this stuff. They live in a different world. In the world that they live in, Neera Tanden actually does seem, relatively left. And so they think that this is a sop to the left, like if you take that more charitable interpretation, if anything, that's almost more worrying, because if that's the case, one, it tells you something about where they're coming from ideologically, that Neera Tanden, who, in addition to everything that you mentioned, has a history of advocating, entitlement reform, that would involve things like, cutting Social Security, seems to have, worked, in the Clinton White House, while the Dickensian horror of, welfare reform was happening, and has sort of denied that she had anything to do with that, but not in a very convincing way. And was certainly very, like, really on the sort of DNC, platform discussions, was one of the leaders of the anti-Medicare for all forces there. If they think that she's a sop to the left, what that really shows is that they're so not afraid of the left that that they don't even like really feel any need to familiarize themselves with it.
Yeah, I was going to make that exact point. It's in many ways it'd be better if it really was some pointless attempt to troll the left, because it would show that they really see the left, or, the Sanders wing of the party, or whatever you want to say, as a genuine threat, and something that they have to combat. Whereas it seems like they, and quite rightly, based on how things have gone now, they see them as just someone, or a group of people that will go along with whatever they do, and they don't have to worry about. They can do whatever they want. The other thing I would say about Tandon is, I think a lot of people have pointed to her various positions, which are terrible, of course. But beyond that, I think Tandon's appointment isn't so much about what she believes, because it's clear if you look at the sum total of her career, she doesn't believe really in anything other than in being part of a democratic administration. She, whatever the party line is at the time, she will take it. When it was marriage equality was bad, she was fine with that. Then when it later became good, she also moved on that. I'm sure, she now says things about Social Security and Medicare, and, says they have to be protected. And of course, she had said the exact opposite, rather, under Obama, because that was the party line then. So, she's less someone who appointed there is really going to, by herself, do a whole bunch of damage. I think it's more that she is just someone she's a yes person. She's just there to just do whatever the party wants. And so that means that there's not really going to be any opposition to, if Biden decides he wants to cut some deal with McConnell and, do a, quote unquote progressive restructuring of Social Security. So rich people, for example, don't get to access it, or maybe get, some other sort of modification like that, which is what Biden has explicitly talked about in 2018. She's not going to put up a fight. She'll just do whatever they want. And so I think that's probably a more accurate way to kind of view her appointment. Though I think we also should still say, hey, if Trump appointed someone who once floated stealing the oil of a country that the U.S. invaded illegally, what would we say about that?
Yeah, right. Obvious. Yeah. That seems clearly right. I mean, that same email sent by a Trump appointee seems like it would have been a week on MSNBC of coverage of it. I like, by the way, Boxy Brown in the chat responding to my speculating about what was going through Biden's mind appointing Tandon, says what was going through Biden's mind is how he had a delicious malted milkshake in Scranton one time, and how root beer used to taste better in the 1960s. Which there might be some truth there, but this is also something, I know we've talked about this before, but it's worth hitting, right? Because I think as the left goes through the various phases of, denial and bargaining and, and all of that stuff, with like what the nature of the Biden administration is going to be. I think a read that some people might cling to is say, okay, well, maybe Biden, whatever sort of core is there, with the with all of these various political pressures and the cognitive decline and everything, maybe Biden, has some really bad underlying views, but look, Biden is very, very, very old. He might not, there's an excellent chance, doesn't have a second term, and he, who knows what could happen, even before that. So then we'd have Kamala Harris, and she's not great, but maybe she's much more susceptible to pressure. After all, Kamala Harris. So this narrative would go. They point out, for example, that she was, she flip-flopped later, but, she was at one point an endorser of Medicare for all. So maybe she is somebody, who could be pushed to the left in a way that Biden couldn't be.
I think that's probably accurate. I mean, look, that's not a best case scenario. Neither of these people is, but I think the things that people were saying about Biden during the campaign, as a way to sort of convince skeptical progressives or people further left to vote for him, that he's someone who he just moves with the times. He's always just kind of been at the exact middle of the party and followed wherever the party goes. I never thought that was really true of Biden. From having looked into his career, I always got the sense that he was always firmly on the conservative end of the party. And you can even look at statistics, legislative ratings and that kind of thing to confirm that. But I do think that kind of more applies to Harris, who went from a really, really harsh, unforgiving, tough on crime prosecutor for her entire career to suddenly, the most liberal voting, at least according to one metric, the most liberal voting Democrat in the entire Senate, because she saw that the winds had shifted and she wanted to basically latch onto this. So I think also Harris has more of a sense of kind of trying to be someone who's like Obama, someone very important, someone who can achieve great things. I'm not sure Biden has any ambition beyond just being president and getting to say that he was president and sort of managing things okay and cutting some deals for 4 years. I think that's basically all he's ever really wanted to do. But I think Harris is one of these people who really feels the desire to be someone transformative and important. So all these things would probably make her more amenable to certain things, particularly climate. She's also younger than Biden, let's not forget, which on the issue of climate is pretty important. But yeah, so it's not going to be great.
Right. I think that much is for sure. I would say on the that metric that shows Harris as the most liberal senator, that if you look at the details of that, the metric they used was basically voting on party line votes. So if you got you became less liberal as you voted for more things that Republicans were voting for. And I think that one small indication of how that metric might be flawed is if we think about so if Bernie Sanders is working with some Republicans who will have him to do some really targeted thing to build more Veterans Administration hospitals, then it's a bipartisan bill, so that makes him less liberal. And if and when Harris voted in the Senate to impose new sanctions on Iran and Russia, which every single Republican voted against because of the politics of the Russia part, or no, sorry, that's not true. The last part I said isn't true, but they have there were a bunch of Republicans voting for that, but the point is that when you think about stuff like that, right, some of the Russia stuff, I think it's actually not true in the case that I just gave, right, but some of the Russia stuff where the partisan politics would have aligned in a different way. I think you start to get a sense of I think put it generously, right, how crude that metric is. I mean, it seems like what it really shows is that she is, she's a blue state senator who has no particular, she was a blue state senator with no particular incentive to, to do anything much in her time in the Senate, except for to please the party, and then to prepare the ground to run for president, which presumably she hit the ground running, planning to do. So I don't think that, I don't know. I mean, I think I could see being optimistic about Harris if there was some incredibly powerful pressure for her to move to the left. That I could see saying, okay, well, look, she doesn't really have any principles. So if the thing that was going to be advantageous to her was to do that, then I could see thinking that it would happen. But if that wasn't, I don't know. I mean, I guess what it gets down to is that I'm not super optimistic about that kind of pressure exerting itself, anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, it remains to be seen what happens in these next 4 years. I think that's obviously going to tell us what happens after that, but I think it will be a really critical time for sort of figuring out what exactly this Bernie wing what its relationship is to the rest of the Democratic Party, what kind of things it's willing to do, and also to what extent even Democrats are going to be susceptible to popular pressure. I mean, I think the George Floyd protests that we saw this year, these massive anti-police brutality protests, that's not going to stay bottled up for the Trump administration. It's not like these protests are just going to stop because the Democrats in the White House. And nothing has been done about this. Police are going to keep killing people. Unfortunately, they still are. They as we speak. And so I think it's only a matter of time before there's another powder keg like this, where you see this massive explosion of protests and civil action. Question is, how does the Biden administration respond? It's in a tough place. It can't be necessarily quite as punitive and harsh as the Trump administration was. At the same time, you would have thought that the Democrats' vehement, very public support of Me Too would have maybe caused some problems with the Tara Reade allegation. And of course, what the Democrats did instead was to sort of just completely demolish that entire movement. So, perhaps that is what will happen with Black Lives Matter. I'm not sure. One interesting thing to think about with Harris going forward, when we think about electoral politics, although I think, on the presidential level, I don't know if electoral politics, it's really even worth thinking about that much. It's the down ballot stuff that's really far more important. If we're thinking about like the left and progressives and all of that. But since we're on the subject of presidential campaigns, if it is indeed the case that Harris runs in 2024, and if the Biden administration ends up being, exactly as bad as these cabinet appointees and his Wall Street funding and everything else points to, then I'm already seeing reporters talk about the Biden-Harris administration. Even though this is a thing that Biden just invented in 2019, people didn't really talk about.
So you could call it the Obama-Biden administration.
Yeah, exactly. But now apparently it's sort of established convention to refer to it as the Biden-Harris administration, which I guess is a way to sort of give her the little boost for 2024. The thing is, if this is a very unpopular and kind of failed administration, is Harris being kind of tied around that legacy, around Biden's choices as executive, whether the choice is good or bad, and the inaction that he decides to take on certain issues, it may actually not help her. It might actually be an albatross around her neck, because it worked for Biden certainly to sort of attach himself to Obama. But Obama is a very popular, well-liked president who won 2 terms, won the first in this massive, massive surge of national and global optimism and good faith. Biden didn't do that. I mean, every poll after poll after poll shows that Biden's win was driven by anti-Trump sentiment and Trump's inability to deal with the coronavirus. So attaching Biden is not a beloved character in the Democratic canon the way that Obama is. I know they're trying to make him that, but and maybe it'll work. I don't know, but it doesn't really seem to have so far. And once he actually governs, and if he does things that people really don't like, it's having her name attached to that may not be that good a thing.
Fair enough. Well, if you want to know more about Biden, people should read Yesterday's Man, and I'm sure they'll have Branko on to talk more about this as the Biden-Harris administration starts up. So I am. People are not sick of hearing me talk. They can see me in about 15 minutes on the Jacobin YouTube channel, talking to Matt McManus about Marxism and liberalism. But can also check out the next episode of Give Them an Argument is coming out on Monday, premiering on 7:30 p.m. EST. As always, that one is going to be Amber Frost from Chapo and ContraPoints, who was a pre-record. So just finished talking to her. Really fun conversation. So people should check that out. Check out Yesterday's Man, and gonna cut it there for today. But thank you so much, Branko. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, great chatting with you.